I'm still somewhat shocked at how this all fell apart and that Penn State actually made the move to fire James Franklin. But now it's time to look ahead and see which direction the Nittany Lions and Pat Kraft will actually go for that next head coach.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. This is a crossover episode with myself and Brian Smith, recruiting expert here, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, to talk about Penn State's list of available head coaches that they are going to target now after a shocking decision across the board for Penn State to actually move forward and fire James Franklin. We're going to get into the recruiting angle of it as well, because you're going to see Penn State take a lot of hits on the recruiting trail, and that's understandable. But where do they go from here? And what about the team? How do they maintain the core of this team? Can they even do it? Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward, Mazda Move and Be Moved. Okay, let's not waste any more time. Here's my conversation with Brian Smith about what's next for Penn State football.
Zach, it is a really unique scenario to see a coach like this. I mean, he's had a lot of success at Penn State, but he has been let go after the Northwestern loss. Your first reaction probably wasn't one that you were shocked, because I know you've got contacts, but were you surprised by how many people were happy to see him go or not? What was just your overall thought about the Penn State fan base with Franklin being gone?
I think I'm still most in shock by just how quickly it fell apart. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. You go from being in the lead against Oregon in the whiteout game to firing the head coach that has 100 plus wins, all the New Year's Six bowl game wins, but just couldn't get to the mountaintop, right? Off of a college football playoff semifinal. Like, come on. I get it. But if you've been following this team this season, you knew this was necessary. People that are 1,000 feet away, that have the bird's eye view, that don't understand the situation, are going to laugh at Penn State and say they're tanking their program. That's not it. This was necessary. It was due. It was time. Unfortunately, I mean, this program fell apart when James Franklin had the best setup, best personnel group. He said he had the best, that in combination of coaches and players, he had the best personnel group ever of his career. And they lost to Oregon. Okay, that's understandable. But then you let one loss turn into two into three, and those teams were Oregon, UCLA, and Northwestern. It's not like it was Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. Then this would all be okay. It's like, oh, this is typical Penn State. They just lost all the big games. No, this was a new rock bottom for a James Franklin team.
I was shocked at the way they played against UCLA. The Bruins came out, they were at 24-7 or something like that. They just looked like they were the only team that practiced that week. That told me there were some cracks in the foundation from the players, but not necessarily Franklin and his staff. Sometimes you lose a big game, it takes its footing for a little while. But the way they played against Northwestern told me that the buy-in wasn't there anymore, because Northwestern doesn't have half the talent that Penn State does. And they've got some physicality, got running backs, pretty good player, etc. Yep. But in the fourth quarter, there were times they ran over Penn State. And I was just like, how is that possible? Because one thing I never thought I would see was their defense just be average at best. Third and fourth down kind of plays. Mm-hmm. And that's when I thought to myself, it's a matter of time before he gets fired. Now, I didn't think he was getting fired after the Northwestern game. I really didn't. I thought they'd wait till the bye week at the latest at the end of the season. But when they drop the hammer, it is what it is. So my thought now is, how do you get this done quickly and try to do your best to mitigate losses to the recruiting? Because it could go 100 directions with the class of 26. And I did a podcast on Locked On the Portal earlier today saying, hey, the kids that are closer to home are more likely to stick with Penn State long-term. They'll at least take the phone call from the next coach. The guys that are from further away, North Carolina, California, whatever, that's more likely to be difficult but they'll still get several of these kids to sign. It's the 27 and 28 classes who had just started to build their relationships. Those, and like the 27 class, you and I talked about it several times on Locked On Nittany Lions. Mm-hmm. That's a great group. In state, New Jersey's got some good players, and of course DC/Maryland, and then the whole Hampton Roads area. That area is just loaded. They're going to miss out on a lot of those kids. So my first question to you is, which coach do you want, and what do you think the fans want to try not only to get a good coach again, but somebody like Franklin could recruit? That is not debatable. Can they get somebody that can do both? Who do you got?
Yeah, there's so I have my list, I have the Penn State fan list, and I also have the Penn State list, right? In theory, based on what we know. This isn't some insider, no, but there are multiple different lists here. To answer what you say about recruiting, Penn State knew what it was doing with this move. When it comes to this move, they knew that they were going to take a hit in recruiting. So recruiting's the last thing on my mind right now, especially with the transfer portal. You can recover from this. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy, but Penn State can recover. Keemon Spell was already flaking. Khalil Taylor had decommitted, and it's no surprise that the remaining players of Leighton Von Brandt and Gabe Jenkins also said adios for the moment. And who knows? Maybe they get a guy that ends up being able to recruit them back. Very unlikely. I'm just saying we don't know at the end of the day. So with that being said, my head coaching candidates that I would like, the home run with the highest ceiling, and then somebody that, hey, if you can outmaneuver an SEC program, these two, I think this is and my list is basically everybody else is kind of the same after that. Will Stein from Oregon, Mike Elko at Texas A&M. That's my list in terms of, hey, this is kind of realistic. This actually, now it's going to be difficult to pry him away from Texas A&M, but I like Mike Elko a ton because of the New Jersey connections. That's huge for Penn State, regional recruiting. He went to the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, so he's got the Pennsylvania connections, he's got the New Jersey connections, and he's shown that he can manage not only Duke, but now Texas A&M. So he's succeeding at every level. You got to give him a phone call and see what you can do to wrestle him away from Texas A&M. If you want that, not necessarily a long shot, but if you give this guy 5-6 years, can be the next Dan Lanning type. If you're committed to him, you got to go with the guy that's been following Dan Lanning. That has been his second in command, Will Stein. And it's because you get the defensive element with Mike Elko. I'm just tired of mediocre quarterback play, honestly, Brian. Maybe that's where that stems from. But Will Stein is a quarterback whisperer. He turned Dylan Gabriel into a day 2 NFL draft pick. Dante Moore went from an afterthought at UCLA, a 5-star bust, to this guy might be the future number 1 overall draft pick. Maybe that changes a little bit with that recent Indiana game, but now he's in the conversation. And it's been such a revelation for Oregon because of Dan Lanning, but also because of Will Stein. Give me that at Penn State. If you want the next Dan Lanning, go get the guy that is right there with him and bring that over. Just somebody that's high energy, young, and has shown, he has no head coaching experience. He's close enough. Okay, so that's my 2. Everybody else is kind of equal. The reason I don't include Curt Cignetti myself is because I don't think it's realistic. I don't think he's going to leave Indiana, actually. So maybe that applies to Mike Elko too. But Cignetti, I just don't see him leaving Indiana when they bought into him fully. He's on the short list for the Penn State fan coaching list. Matt Rhule is going to be, depending on who you ask. It's split. Some people are going to say, go get Matt Rhule. Other people are going to say, absolutely not. You are not getting anything different from James Franklin when it comes to the big games. Do not go after Matt Rhule. Aside from how much do you want to align yourself with Penn State's past? Because Matt Rhule is a Joe Paterno disciple, but he is from State College. He's from Central Pennsylvania. He played at Penn State. You can see, and he did work under the current athletic director in Pat Kraft. So you can see why Matt Rhule becomes such a realistic option. He checks a lot of boxes for better, whether people agree with it or not. Matt Rhule is actually almost objectively the best candidate for Penn State. Manny Diaz has popped up. Urban Meyer's popped up. Nick Saban. But if we're kind of combining all of those names together in a list of who's most likely the most realistic one. Matt Rhule is going to be up there. Curt Cignetti, Manny Diaz, Urban Meyer, and I think Will Stein is maybe closer than people think.
I think that's a pretty interesting list. When we come back, I'm going to give my list, and I'm also going to start breaking down some of the recruiting decommitments, what I think is going to happen. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as some people do. That is next on this crossover of Locked on the Portal and Locked on Nittany Lions. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. The game is moving forward for those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board, that move crowds, culture, and keep moving the game forward. For Penn State, they've got to find a new way to move forward with a new head coach, but that program has had so much history and so many great players. It doesn't really matter who it is that comes in. They're going to have a lot to live up to, but they're going to have an opportunity with a lot of great players. In Penn State, even though they're down right now, that's not going to last very long. This is going to be a great coaching search, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So Penn State will not be down for long. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like that, there's more to every highlight. There's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Thank you once again for making Locked on the Portal and Locked on Nittany Lions a part of your day each and every day here on the Locked on Podcast Network. I'm Brian Smith, and I am joined by Zach Seyko. Thank you for joining us. My take on the Penn State coaching search is pretty simple. I would go after Fran Brown, and I'm sure a lot of people don't want him. He's a very brash guy, etc. Penn State's a very conservative place, but if you want somebody that can throw the football, he fits the profile to a T, and he's from Jersey, and he is as good a recruiter as there is in the country. I don't think Penn State will do it, but that's what I would do. Will Stein, I like that quite a bit. There are other young defensive coordinators and whatnot that are possibility, offensive coordinators. There's a lot of ways you could go with that.
Does Penn State really have a bad hire? And it's because of the brand that Penn State, yes, they can make the wrong move when hindsight's 2020, but Eli Drinkwitz is on the table. That could potentially be a hire. Jeff Brom would be a solid hire, right? We are naming so many candidates, and that's because Penn State's a top 10 job. So because of the brand, because of the power that Penn State has, they're not going to whiff. They're not going to settle. They're going to get somebody. So just because Curt Cignetti hypothetically turns them down, they are going to get somebody the same caliber or someone that's still going to fit culturally within the program. You mentioned Fran Brown, and maybe, okay, he's a little bit too brash. So that might be against a culture thing with Penn State. I see people suggesting Lane Kiffin, the exact same thing. I don't think Lane Kiffin would fit in at all. That is an awful hire for Penn State. Good coach. Don't do it.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you ask for. Lane belongs in the South. He enjoys it. That's not the right fit for him. But at any rate, I think Matt Rhule is a mistake because I think he would be 8-4U. He's not a very good recruiter.
So instead of 10-2, it's 8-4.
Yeah, I think they would drop because Franklin was lights out. Rhule is not in the same stratosphere as a recruiter. He's not. And I know I can't compare it quite apples to apples because Nebraska is much harder to recruit to because it's middle of nowhere. But at the same time, Franklin got them in, at least in part. I mean, part of his staff did too. Texas, California, et cetera. They'd never done that. Even when I was a kid, if you looked at their roster, they didn't have California kids and Texas kids and Florida kids dotting the roster.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting how this is being done today. And Franklin was good at it. So roster management was probably his biggest strength other than just discipline for looking for the right kind of guy and all that stuff. And it helped them. But now this isn't what I would call the greatest year to try to go out and hire a coach. I mean, you mentioned Elko. He's not very far into his tenure. His buyout would be massive, and he'd need a massive contract too. I don't see that. That's why hiring,
especially when Penn State has to pay a buyout for James Franklin. Yeah. Like
there was no good way for Penn State to do this. None.
No. But like I said, it was overdue. It had to happen. The fans had turned on Franklin, the donors, the powers that be, because Franklin had always said, Franklin just said, I need this. I need my OC. I need my DC. And he convinced everybody that if you give me XYZ, I will be able to do it. And not only did you not even deliver to your average, you didn't even meet your regular threshold, you collapsed completely. So you got the answer. That's the thing. There's no more what if. You got your answer that it's not going to happen. So what does Penn State want to be? Does Penn State want to be perennially 9-3 and 10-2, maybe in this new expanded Big Ten? Or do you want to compete for national titles? Do you think you're in the same conversation with Ohio State every year? Do you like losing to Notre Dame on the football field and off the football field? If you don't like any of that, as the powers that be at Penn State, you had to make a change.
I get it. I don't have any problem with that. But it's just like there is no perfect candidate that is not going to come with a big buyout, but also has a lot of experience winning. Those two things you can't pull apart. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what Matt Campbell's buyout is. Maybe that's a possibility, but it's still probably not cheap. He's at least got Ohio ties. Yeah, that would be about as good as I think they're going to get under circumstances. And he's obviously a good coach. I just don't know if he can recruit at Penn State because, no offense to Iowa State, it's impossible to recruit elite players there on a consistent basis because it's middle of nowhere. So that's a guess, but he can coach, but he would have a lot better resources at Iowa State or at Penn State than compared to Iowa State.
Yes, he would.
I would think they could be a top 12 program pretty much yearly. That would be my guess. Now, if he can get over that final hump, that's going to come down to recruiting. And that's a guess. Mm-hmm. But there aren't any shiny knights waiting that are Penn State grads that are all the above. Cheap buyout, proven coach, great recruiter. That does not exist.
No.
So this is going to be a really interesting coaching search. To that end, the same questions that, Zach, you and I are asking, recruits, their 7-on-7 coaches, their parents, their trainers, their high school coaches are asking the same. And I'm sure you've read some of the comments by recruits around the country, rightfully so. Some are saying I'm going to stick with it for a while. Some have decommitted. Keemon Spell, among others, have pledged to.
Shocking.
Yeah, like we saw that one coming, but it is what it is. So they need to make the bleeding go away. Give everybody the background on the guy that is the interim. This is so important. I think they made the right hire, but give me your take and what people should know about the interim head coach.
Oh, Terry Smith was a no-brainer, and he's been James Franklin's right-hand man for the longest time. And it's like, oh, well, then he's no different. He's an extension of James Franklin. This is going to be exactly the same. Okay, well, I don't have a lot of expectations for what Penn State's going to do for the rest of the season, but Terry Smith himself is a Penn State grad. He played ball at Penn State. He played wide receiver at Penn State in the 90s. So he actually checks a lot of similar boxes that a Matt Rhule would in theory, other than actually leading and being a head coach. But he's been the associate head coach for a long time, alongside James Franklin. If you want to stay close to Penn State, if you want the Penn State legacy, you should absolutely give Terry Smith an opportunity, but he doesn't have the name power that somebody else would. I would still like to see Terry Smith retained on a future staff, but that's not a guarantee. That's kind of wishful thinking at that point, because I do think Penn State's going to go, if they don't go with Matt Rhule, they're going to go completely away from the Penn State ties, so to speak. But Terry Smith's a phenomenal recruiter. He's been linked to Temple for a while. Not saying that's going to happen right now. Temple's obviously in a much better situation, but he's been thought of as a future head coaching candidate at a Temple type of job. He has such strong connections in Western Pennsylvania. That's the reason why Pitt can't recruit, because Terry Smith is at Penn State. So he gets all of the good Pittsburgh players to go to Central Pennsylvania. If you can somehow get him to stop the bleeding, and so far, this was the only option. This was the only guy that you could promote to give Penn State a best case scenario for the present. What the future looks like, that's completely different. But if you want all of this to slow down, it was Terry Smith and it was nobody else.
I think that's a really good way to put it, because this is an important time. It's not just recruits, it's the players. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Oh, that's true too. That's what we're going to talk about next here on this crossover, Locked on Nittany Lions and Locked on the Portal. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. If you want to bet on over-unders, parlays, maybe it's one team that you think is going to win the division, maybe who's going to play in the Super Bowl, whatever it is you want to do, you can do it at FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and to get started. We are also brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's where there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal financial tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting so you can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. You can do this right from your phone. You're not going to have to go hunting for everything. It's right there on the app. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, now we have to discuss the inevitable, and that's eventually you got to discuss some of the players leaving. And before anybody asks, I have no idea which guy or guys will or will not. Mm-hmm. It is going to be completely random. A lot of it, they're going to want to wait and see, okay, who are they going to hire? How would I be used? What's the offense going to be like? Defense going to be like? So I'm not going to go into specifics. If Zach wants to, he can certainly guess. Yep. But the bottom line is you're eventually going to lose some of these guys, and we need to at least mention the new rule. I assume it's going to apply to Penn State. I don't know when the rule goes into effect, but for those who do not know, the coach that gets fired at the 30-day window with the last four, it's still applied. Not sure if it applies to the Penn State thing here because it just happened. But the new rule is once the new coach is hired, you get 15 days to enter the portal. So if you don't like the meeting with the guy or whatever, you can hop in. Mm-hmm. I like that rule. I think that's actually kind of smart. And you would still have the normal portal window, which is going to be January 2nd through the 16th. So you'd be covered either way. But Penn State needs to get out ahead of it. And that's why we brought up Coach Smith. He's going to be able to help mitigate some of that. But just out of curiosity, you know that roster very well, Zach. Which position would you be most concerned about losing players because maybe they don't have the right depth after this year beyond seniors leaving? Where would you be most concerned?
I would probably point to the future potential stars and guys that are far away from home. Chaz Coleman, for example. I guess he's not too far away being that he's from Ohio, but Chaz Coleman's been such a revelation at defensive end for them. And Ohio State probably feels like, oh, we whiffed on this one. You get an easy opportunity to right your wrongs. I think Chaz Coleman did want to go to Ohio State. Ohio State didn't recruit him enough. And like I said, now all can kind of be as well. Ohio State fans are calling for it. People know how good Chaz Coleman is. He would end up at Ohio State in the transfer portal. I'd look to a player like Darius Dixon. He's all the way from the state of California. The reason he was at Penn State was because of James Franklin and Terry Smith. So there is that. Terry Smith's still on staff. But Dixon is a long ways away from home. It would not shock me if he transferred back to the West Coast. And who knows? That could be any of Oregon. That could be USC. Maybe James Franklin ends up at UCLA. Maybe he ends up at UCLA because I think that would be a phenomenal fit for Franklin himself. So I'm looking to a couple key players here and there. We know that Penn State has some Florida players that are from the southeastern part of the country. I think that you look to the position groups like linebacker. Dan Connor's in place, and Dan Connor's the Penn State legacy, the defensive line, aside from Chaz Coleman, Deion Barnes. If those guys stay on a future staff, which would make a ton of sense, because Penn State, I think Penn State's going to try to hold true to its identity somewhat and find somebody that's going to mix the two, bring a fresh start, but also incorporate, Dan Connor, Deion Barnes, Trace McSorley, keep those guys on staff that made Penn State. But that's, at some players, let's also think of this. So the roster, even if the roster, I'm not concerned about it at the end of the day, it's going to sting losing guys that Penn State fans really like, or were really going to like because they were eventually going to turn into really quality players. But that where Penn State's going to lose players, they're also going to gain new iconic ones too. Okay. So you lose ones in the transfer portal. You're going to get the future coaches, star players as well, or players that really like him. You're also, and I think Penn State just, with all of the seniors moving on, going to the NFL, right? This team was already going to have a new identity as it was next season anyway, with or without James Franklin. Lose Drew Aller, Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, the transfer wide receivers, guys on the defensive side of the football that came back, tonight, Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. So Penn State's already going to look new as it is. And there are some players that I think of, maybe like an Ethan Grunkemeyer, where it would make sense for him to stay at Penn State because Penn State needs a quarterback. And if it's, say, a Will Stein, you're not going to be able to bring Dante Moore with you. And I don't know who Oregon's immediate backups are off the top of my head. But if Grunkemeyer fits the system, it might make sense for Grunkemeyer to stay as a former top 10 quarterback recruit once upon a time. Same thing with the local running backs, or local players like a running back in Quentin Martin. It's not, oh, everybody that was a James Franklin recruit is going to decommit. They're going to flip. No, I look to Kevin Brown, who probably still wants to go to Penn State, even though James Franklin's not the phenomenal eventual 5-star offensive lineman. But don't think that everybody's going to leave just because Franklin's gone. And Penn State knew what it was getting into. You will see natural player attrition, but it's not going to be every single locker is cleared out. Not the case.
Yeah, I agree. I think the recruiting hits will be less for the 26 class than many think, because they signed so many or have so many commitments from local kids. That's important. And they did such a good job of selling the program as a whole, not just one coach or two coaches. That's kind of the Penn State way, and it always has been. The bigger concern I have is getting guys that are long-term in recruiting, and then those guys that just got on the roster that you mentioned. So it's a combination. It's the younger players from further away. You took the words right out of my mouth with the roster. Some of the older guys that are PA guys and stuff, I doubt they leave. It's possible maybe if one's going to be a grad student or something, maybe they'll try something new. But it's the recruits that are further away and the players on the roster that are from further away. They don't have as many ties to the institution itself, other than that. But like you said at the beginning, Zach, they needed to make a change. Change is sometimes about taking a step or two backward to eventually reach your ultimate goal. That's not fun, but James Franklin had been flatlined forever, and then he fell off the earth in the last 3 weeks. Like, they just never recovered from the Oregon loss. I don't know why. It's very odd, because they actually played pretty well in that game in a lot of ways, but didn't win, and they just never recovered. It's one of the more bizarre things I saw. And sometimes a coach's message is no longer received, at least not in the way that it needs to. He'd been there since 2014. It's a long tenure. It's 12. This was his 12th season.
Yes, it was.
Maybe that's just part of it. So good luck to James Franklin wherever he goes. But any last parting words?
No, just brace for impact. Penn State is a top 10 program. This is a destination job for somebody. And it would have been for James Franklin. I think did James Franklin and his agent leverage opportunities like a USC or a Florida once upon a time to maybe get some more money? So be it. But I really didn't think it would come to this. I think that I thought that if everything was going to continue the way it needed to happen this way in order for Penn State and Franklin to part ways. This kind of chaotic situation, because if he had lost to Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana, status quo, nothing changes, and you go about your business. It just wasn't the season. But it was this total shocking collapse that led to this. This Penn State is going to set off a domino effect that is going to cause chaos around college football. If they happen to poach Curt Cignetti, Mike Elko, the domino effect that's going to set off, because then it's going to force these other power brands to go get their next head coach, and big fish eats little fish, right? So a Will Stein, as we kind of talk things through, because Penn State has to pay Franklin's buyout and future staff members as well. You're paying for a $700 million stadium renovation. You asked the donors to fund additional resources for this super NIL roster to retain the NFL talent, also get Trevor Pena and Amari Campbell out of the portal. That costs money. And in order to somewhat offset that, you can't necessarily go buy Mike Elko out of his contract. Will Stein doesn't have those kinds of guarantees. but he offers the same kind of upside and potential without the similar type of price tag. And I think that's where Penn State, honestly, it seems like a long shot, but it's a lot more realistic than it necessarily meets the eye. So I know Manny Diaz is very well liked between Penn State fans, the Penn State administration. Not my personal favorite candidate. I think you're getting the same thing with James Franklin with a little less recruiting. You and I, a conversation I think about a long time ago, maybe a year and a half plus, maybe almost 2 years to this point, where you were pretty critical because you followed the Hurricanes for a long time and knew how that situation went down, and Manny Diaz just does not recruit that well. Maybe things have changed since he's kind of reinvented himself. That was a while ago, and years have passed, but I want to see Penn State do something slightly different, trying to bring together, keep your Penn State identity while bringing in fresh ideas. So and because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, it's not going to be as ugly and as gruesome, where it might be a 1 to 2 year slow rebuild. Year 3, year 4, you can be right back in Big Ten title contention. I won't say, hey, you're a top 4 team, but you can be a sneaky dark horse contender for the Big Ten conference once again by year 3 after you get through some of this. And it's because Penn State's at a loss for money right now. They got to pay some bills.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty well said. Thank you to everybody for checking us both out. This is Zach Seyko. I am Brian Smith. Zach, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Same places as you. Locked On Nittany Lions, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Talking about this daily and then some. There's just so much to cover. I never thought we'd be having these conversations. The season's over at Game 6 for Penn State, but now the conversations have doubled and tripled with what's going down.
Absolutely. You can find the Portal Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you again soon.